Let's continue exploring the universe within art and the art behind redstone. I'm your host, OmLedu. I've noticed in the comments that a lot of people are building crazy amounts of chests on their multi-item slot sorters, and that is really awesome. However, mist sorters are better suited to be small and compact. There are only about 1,400 items in the game, and most of these are going to be rare, unobtainable, or non-stackable items, none of which can go in a mist sorter anyway. So if you're using more than like 60 chests on your mists, that implies that you have like 10 chests just for dirt or cobblestone, in which case we should just use bulk filters for those items. These are cheaper, faster, and don't have the limitations that come with using a slot sorter. You don't have to leave any items behind in the chest, you can just grab them and go. It even allows us to add super simple shulker loaders directly to the filters. We can also add non-stackable filters and some super simple shulker unloaders as well. Or maybe you want an automated unloader. No matter what kind of storage system you already have in place or are planning on building, we can add filters to it for common items, and we'll talk about all of this near the end of the video. So if you've already built or want to use some aspects of my previous designs, such as the fancy automated input for the mist sorter, we will talk about how to customize and add filters to these things near the end of the video. So hopefully you will have a better understanding of how to do this for your own custom storage. But for now, let's run through a simple build-along. So we're going to divide the area up into 3 different sections. The slot sorter will be on the end, the filters in the middle, and then your input and non-stackable items at the beginning. And that section will stick out 1 block farther behind the machine than everything else. Start off by deciding how many chests you want everything to have. So for the mist sorter, you want it to have an odd number of chests in vertical rows. Then we're going to skip 4 blocks in between the chest for the mist and the chest for the filters. The chest for the filters can also be turned sideways, but keep in mind that each vertical row on the filters will be a single item. And you can have as many filters or as many chests as you want, but we're going to leave 1 block of space in between the non-stackable and the stackable filters, and again you can have as many chests as you want, but we do need to leave 4 blocks of space on the other side for our input. And again, the only limitations on how many chests you have is the mist sorter down at the end. It needs to have an odd number of chests in vertical rows. For this design, we're going to build a simple input and a simple slot sorter. I wanted to focus on filters this time, but the layout will be exactly the same if you do want to have a complex slot sorter or a complex unloader. But regardless of what you want to customize, this middle part will be exactly the same. So we're going to start off by placing hoppers pointed into every single chest on our filter chests. Then above these hoppers, diagonally back, we're going to place a row of solid blocks so that we can place hoppers pointed into these solid blocks. These are going to be our filter hoppers, and basically you just don't want the filter hoppers to be able to push items into any container, is why we are pointing them at blocks. Then toward the end, we want to place some temporary blocks so that we can place a row of hoppers above our filter hoppers that are pointed off toward the end of our storage system. This is our intake line, so these will take items from the input and send them all the way through our storage to our output. In this example, our output is going to be where the mist sorter is. So basically, no matter what kind of storage you already have, to add filters, you just have to extend the intake line. Think of the intake line as its own thing. All it really is a tube that is just moving items from your input to your output. And as such, it can go in any direction. It can go up, down, left, or right in a zigzag. However, your filters are just attached to your intake line and are pulling items out of the intake line. But when building these filters, be sure to place in this dust first. We're going to place glass on top of it, but if you place the glass on first, it becomes really hard to place that dust under the glass, especially if you have a lot of filters lined up in a row. And of course, these are totally tileable. You can build as many of them next to each other as you want. But our topmost comparators are looking at our filter hoppers through those solid blocks. So now we just need to load our filter hoppers with the items that we want to be sorted. So inside of our filter hoppers, we need to place 1 item in the last 4 slots that stacks to 64 and has been named something unique on an anvil so that no other item can ever stack with it. Then in the first slot, we want at least 1 of the item that is being filtered for, or you can throw in a whole stack. Either way, 41 of that item will always be trapped in the filter. And if you add more filler items to reduce the amount of items that are trapped, it will no longer be overflow protected. So if this fills up, it will break this item sorter and the neighboring ones. So when making filters for common items, you never want to have more than 4 filler items because you want it to be overflow protected. But if you're filtering out like diamonds for some reason, then you can just add more filler items so that it is no longer overflow protected, but it will never fill up anyway because diamonds are rare. But once you've loaded all of your filter hoppers, now let's build the non-stackable item filters. So again, place hoppers pointed into the back of every chest, but here at the top, we're just going to add hoppers pointed down so that it's now even with the intake line. And then just carry the intake line over these hoppers like so. Now because the non-stackable items don't require a hopper filter, we could actually place an additional chest up here and have a hopper pointed into it. But I figured that most people probably wouldn't want their non-stackable item chest to be one chest higher than the rest of their chests. But if you do, you can, and if you don't, you can just add hoppers pointed down to make it all even. That is totally up to you. The redstone is going to be built exactly like what we just did, just one block higher. So rather than starting at the hopper under the intake line, we're going to start at the intake line. And I always recommend building 2 non-stackable item filters next to each other, at least 2, because they do like to skip items occasionally, so if you build 2 of them next to each other, the odds of them skipping are very low. And you could always build more than 2 if you want to have more chests for non-stackable items. But the only difference in the redstone is that the non-stackable filter's comparator is looking at the intake line, whereas the stackables comparator is looking at the filter hopper. So one of them is just 1 block lower than the other one, but the non-stackable is looking at the intake line and pulling out non-stackable items directly from the intake line. Now for our item input. So if you want to make like an automated shulker unloader or something, you can just tie that directly into this input line. But for this video, we're going to build a simplified version. So start off by placing a double chest that overlaps on top of the input line, and then have droppers pointing up into that chest. And it doesn't matter how many droppers there are, but on the bottom one, we're going to place a hopper pointing into it, and then we can either just place a chest on top of this hopper and call it good. Just throw items in there to be sorted. Or we can extend it out by 1 and place the chest sideways, really however you want to do it. You can also just add more hoppers and have a kind of manual shulker unloader. I like to use nether wart or obsidian, something that's hard to break with a pickaxe, so that when I'm breaking my shulkers, I don't accidentally break the wall. But this is a really easy way to just automatically unload shulkers without having to bother making complex redstone. Now we just need to power the dropper elevator. So we're going to place solid blocks right next to the bottom one, and then every other dropper going all the way up. Then place redstone torches on top of these blocks. Now we want a comparator next to this block, looking at the dropper through the block, going into a repeater, into a solid block, and then a comparator pointed into that solid block. Another comparator next to that one, facing the opposite direction. Make sure that that comparator is pointing into that block. Then place 3 redstone dust like so, and a 4th one next to this block over here. Then place a comparator on subtraction mode, going into a solid block with redstone dust right there, so this dust is pointed into the block with the torch on it. Now place another solid block, a repeater, and 1 final dust. And so this is what you will end up with. This configuration will just ensure that no items are ever left idle in the dropper elevator. The way this works is that this comparator will activate anytime there are items in the bottom dropper, which will then power this extender right here. This extender will keep it on after the items have left the bottom dropper. Then all of this will just activate this comparator clock, which will trigger all of the torches to turn on and off, thus activating all of the droppers to send all of the items up to our intake line. Then the items will go through the intake line, the non-stackables will get pulled out by your non-stackable filter, and then all of the rest will fall into their respective filters until it reaches the end, and then it will go off to your miss, which is what we need to build now. But if you want to have a fancy timer input for the miss that will make sure that no items are ever left idle in the back of the machine, I will link a video for that here on the screen and in the description, and it will fit right here. But for this video, I'm going to build a simplified version that has a lever to flush the system instead of a complex automatic timer. But for this one, start off by digging down 3 rows behind the chest. Then we're going to place hoppers pointed into the left side of all of the chests, then droppers pointed up in the spaces between all of these hoppers, aligned with the right side of all of the chests. And we don't need this very bottom one here on the one closest to our filters. But we do need another hopper pointed into the bottom dropper underneath all of the rows of hoppers except for the very last one. Then on the side closest to our intake, we're going to place a dropper pointed into that bottom dropper right there. So the first one is going to push items into the dropper line, and then this dropper line is going to carry those items up. Now on the front side, we're going to place a hopper pointed into this bottom dropper with a chest on top. We're going to change this chest here in a little bit, but for now we're going to leave it as is so that it matches my other tutorials if you happen to follow along one of those to build your mist sorter. That way everything looks the same and we can hopefully avoid some confusion. But now we need to build the clock. So have a comparator right there on subtraction mode, then a repeater on a 3-tick delay, so poke that 2 times, then another repeater with no extra delay, and connect this all with dust. Then place a redstone torch on the side of that block. Now aligned with the bottom hoppers and droppers, we need a row of solid blocks 1 block away from them. Now we need more rows that have 1 row of air in between each row of solid blocks, like so. So the top row should end 1 block below the topmost hoppers and droppers, but the bottom row will be level with the bottom hoppers and droppers. This is why we needed an odd number of chests in the front of the mist, so that everything lines up as you see here. But now everywhere that there is a hopper needs to be a torch. So on every other block on all of these rows, we need to place a redstone torch. And these rows of torches should be directly behind the vertical rows of hoppers, like so. Now here at the very bottom, here at the end, we won't actually have one because there's no hopper under there, because the items are just going to stop in that chest. But now behind every dropper, we need to place a solid block that is level with our rows of solid blocks, like so. Now next to the droppers, we need repeaters pointed into the droppers with no additional delay, and then redstone dust connecting all of these together. The repeaters will activate all of the droppers to move the items up, but now we need to connect the droppers to the hoppers via a chest. Make sure the right side of these chests is above a dropper, so that the droppers push items up into the chest, and then the next row of hoppers pulls the items down. Now we need to tie this redstone torch to all of this dust. Now if you built this small enough to where that torch can power all of this dust without needing any extra repeaters, you're golden. You can just do what you see here, and as long as all of the dust is now active, it will work. However, if you built this longer to where it cannot power all of the dust, we will need to power the rows in a different way. And I will link a video here on the screen talking about how to infinitely expand a mist to be as big as you want it to be. But if it's just slightly too big, we need to count out 15 dust from one side. So we're going to just pretend that this is the 15th dust. And we need a repeater pointed into the block that has the 15th dust on top of it. Then we're going to skip a row going down and place another repeater aligned with the top one, pointed also into the solid block row. So one repeater will power 2 rows. It will power the top row and then the row underneath it. So we only need a repeater on every other row. Now we need to tie these repeaters together. So we're going to use a zigzag of glass with dust on top because the glass won't pinch the dust. So we'll need dust behind the repeaters, then just work our way up with dust on top of the glass until these repeaters are connected. And now we just need to tie this redstone to our torch. However, when we do this, make sure that the dust does not connect to the rows. If you're using repeaters to power the rows, you cannot power the rows with dust. So we need to go back so that the dust does not connect. You do not want that dust to connect. But of course, we can refresh the signal to activate all the repeaters on the glass tower if needed. We just want the back rows to only be powered by the glass tower. Now as it is, with this simplified input, some items will always remain idle in the back of the machine. But if we want to flush the system, we can simply add a lever that will activate the clock. The lamp is totally optional, just that lever needs to activate that dust to turn on the clock to allow all of the items to get flushed out of the system. And again, this is totally optional, just if you want the items to get flushed out, you can use a lever. Now, as with all mist sorters, we need to load in at least one item into every single slot of every chest except for the final row. We do want to have some empty chest at the end to act as overflow, but all of the sorting chests need to have at least one item in every single slot. But at least some of these chests here on the end need to have some empty spaces for your overflow or for items that get skipped. Now all that's left is to attach the intake line down to the slot sorter. So this hopper line up here just needs to connect down here to this dropper. Technically, this chest does not need to be here. So if you followed along with a different tutorial, you can break out that chest and hopper and replace it with a hopper pointed down into that dropper with a double chest on top. This will allow you to build a wall right there to hide all of the redstone and extra chests. But basically, we're just going to work our way up with double chests and hoppers until we reach the same level as our intake and can tie in our intake hopper line to our chest and hoppers down to our dropper. Now all of those chests do need to be double chests. You need to have some extra storage because a slot sorter is about half the speed as a normal filter. So you will need some extra storage in between the filters and the miss. So 3 double chests should do the trick. Now if you want to add some simple shulker loaders to your filters, that is super duper easy. We're going to break out this bottom row of chests and then go around to the back and break out the bottom row of hoppers. Then place a temporary line of blocks right there underneath those chests so that we can place hoppers pointed into these blocks that are also underneath the new bottom row of chests. Then come around here, break out the temporary blocks, and you're left with a super simple shulker loader. Now this is manual, you have to place these shulkers on here and you have to break them off by hand. And but this will load items from this bottom row of chest directly into the shulker. And now I also recommend, again, to use obsidian or nether wart, something that's hard to break with a pickaxe, so you don't accidentally break the floor when you're mining out your shulkers. Now the way this is you can even pull items out of these hoppers if you ever need the items that are trapped in there. And then you can just throw a shulker on there and it will fill up. And then when you break it, just be sure to not aim through it, to aim, kind of at the obsidian or the wart, so you don't accidentally break that hopper back there. But that's an easy way to make a shulker loader. And with that, we are now totally done. So to use this, all we have to do is throw items into this chest or throw shulkers on top of those hoppers to be unloaded, and then the items will travel through the system. All of the common items will get pulled out by the filters, the non-stackables will get pulled out by those, your shulkers can get loaded, and then all of your extra various items will get sorted by the miss, until you finally end up with your overflow down here at the end. Before we end this video, I want to talk a little bit about customizing pre-existing storage systems. So like if you want to build an automated shulker unloader, or if you followed along in one of my previous tutorials, maybe you can add filters to it or better understand how storage systems work. One way to better visualize storage systems is that you have your unloader, your slot sorters, your filters, your non-stackable filters. All of these are completely different machines. They have nothing to do with each other. They are only attached and shared by an intake line. And an intake line is just a line of hoppers going across the top, feeding items from the start to the finish. So like here, we just added some hoppers and chests to the slot sorter, to extend where its intake is, where its input is. And then we can just build some filters on this new intake line. And if we want to change where our chests are, we just change where our intake line is. So like here, the filters are making the chest stick out by a block. Well, if we didn't like that, we could just change the intake line by moving it back 1 block, and then we can move all of the filters, back so that all of the chests are flush. And this works the same if you want to make the intake line curve around a corner, or in a U shape, or a zigzag. However you want your chest to be laid out is all determined by your intake line. You can even raise the intake line by just building a dropper elevator. So like here we have the shulker unloader that I built in a previous video that I will link in the video description. But if we wanted it to raise the items up even higher, we can just add droppers. Or in the middle of the intake line, if you want the items to go up to give you more room or something, you just add some droppers and then power those droppers. So like for this shulker unloader, all we would have to do is add a block, add some dust that will get activated by the pre-existing clock, and then just work our way up with torches and blocks to power the new droppers. And that's it. Even if you've built a complete storage system and you have no more room to add filters, you can always add filters at the end. Your intake line never has to stop. Whatever is your current overflow can just be converted into something else so that your intake line can be extended. Like here, we have a miss sorter, so normally these chests here at the end would be for your overflow, but if we fill them with items, well, now they're sorters. They are no longer overflow chests. We will need to add another torch down here to make sure that the final chest remains functional rather than just an overflow chest. But all we have to do is add a hopper, point it into a dropper, then add that torch, and now all of these chests function as sorting chests rather than overflow. And now we just need to extend this dropper elevator back all the way up to give us room to build filters, and then just have this dropper pointed into a chest to send the items off to a row of hoppers to act as the extension to our item line. And boom, now we have more room to build filters. You know, of course, we do need to power this dropper elevator, and since this is at the end of a miss, we can just power it with the miss if we want to. You know, it will be kind of slow, but the items going through it are already bottlenecked, so it doesn't matter. You know, we can just tie it into the pre-existing redstone like so, and it will power it all. Or if you're not attaching this to a miss, or your miss isn't powerful enough to power these droppers and you want to power them by themselves, all we have to do is build what we built earlier. You know, just a simple comparator clock to activate all of the droppers. And again, if we want this to be a lossless elevator where no items ever get idle in the droppers, all we have to do is add an extender to this clock. So just a comparator pointed into that block, a comparator pointed the other way with 3 dust, and now we have an extended clock that will stay on longer. And if you have even more droppers going up and the items are still remaining idle, you can just extend the extender to stay on even longer. And then now none of the items will ever get stuck because the droppers will remain active even after they're empty. So really, when it comes to building custom storage systems out of different types of item sorters, the biggest custom thing that you need to know is dropper elevators. Because once you get comfortable building dropper elevators on the fly, all of the rest of it is just plug and play. No matter how you want your storage system to be laid out, if you want the chest to wrap around a corner or be in a zigzag or on multiple levels, no matter how complex, the only thing that's customized is your intake line. You know, item filters are all the same. They're plug and play. They never change. Mist sorters will always be built the same no matter where you build them. You know, unloaders will always be the same. The only thing that changes and that needs to be customized is your intake line. So once you learn dropper elevators, the rest is just a line of hoppers that can just be built in any shape without any knowledge whatsoever. And then from there, it's just knowing what the different types of sorters are used for. You know, like filters can only sort out one item, but you can just grab them and go. So they're great for bulk storage. Where like slot sorters can sort tons of different items into a single chest, you know, but they're slow and you have to leave an item behind. So you wouldn't want to use that, you know, for cobblestone and dirt, things that you have a ton of. So combining them will give you the best of both worlds. Thank you so much for watching. Always remember that you are totally awesome. Don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. But above all, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye.